Okay, so today we're going to start by discussing some lab safety. And even though lab safety is not the most glamorous or exciting thing to talk about, it is probably one of the most important aspects of the science classroom, just because in order to do the kind of learning that's going to be best for you, we have to all be operating with the same rules in order for all of us to be safe. And so lab safety not only protects you, but it also protects your classmates. So what you're going to notice is that you have this exact same picture in your notebook. And what we're going to do is follow a very simple pattern here. So there is a very small little snippet, what would actually be what you would write on your doodle note, that just talks about what is the most important summary of that particular rule. And so for wear safety gear, we have wear any protective gear appropriate for the lab as instructed. Then what we're going to do is we're going to go more in depth into what does it mean to wear safety gear. And so let's look at that together right now. Now, all of this is your information. At the very least, you have to write down what was on this graphic here. The more you have to write down, or the more questions you have or notes that you want to take, that is going to be up to you. And so as we work through our lab safety presentation today, this is how it's going to work for each of these overall rules. And then we're going to end our discussion today with a video. So let's go ahead and start off then with wear safety gear. So again, what we're talking about here is you need to wear any protective gear that's appropriate for the lab as instructed. So safety gear or protective gear is going to include things like goggles or safety glasses. We have lab coats or lab aprons. These are going to be times as well that you are going to be wearing gloves in case that we're handling different protective or different microorganisms, things like that. And so as those needs change per lab, it's important that you pay attention to what safety or protective gear is required of you during that lab, and then make sure that that protective gear does not come off of you until the appropriate time, which is generally the end of the lab. So let's look at this in more specifics here. So we're always going to wear laboratory aprons and safety glasses as instructed. Safety glasses protect us not only from projectiles, but things like fire and chemical spills as well. Lab aprons are important because even though we might not be working with something that will harm us if it gets onto our clothes or our bodies, it could just be a safety precaution to keep our clothing safe from stains and contaminants. Safety goggles then, of course, as we just mentioned, can only protect us from fire and chemicals or projectiles if we're wearing them. And so anytime that we are working with any of those areas, you need to have safety goggles on your eyes. And of course, anytime we're working with chemicals, we're always going to be wearing our safety aprons. And so the general rule then, of course, is to wear protective gear appropriate for the lab as instructed. And I will always go through things with you to make sure that you know exactly what those expectations are. So now cleaning up. Cleaning up is really important for several reasons. The first reason it's important is because you're setting the lab up for the next group of students to come through and to get that same experience that you were able to have when you walked into the lab. And so it's putting things back so that it can be started again. It's also important to do to keep you safe, to keep the next people safe. And part of our cleanup procedure is always going to be to wash your hands. We do not just use hand sanitizer and call it good. So at the end of any lab or activity, the expectation is that you're going to wash your hands with soap and water in the appropriate manner for the appropriate amount of time in order to get rid of any residual stuff that you have on your hands after you have completed your activity. And so when we are cleaning up, what does this entail? We're going to be sure that we turn off any water and gas. We disconnect any electrical devices that we may have used. We return all materials to their proper places. We dispose of any chemicals or leftovers according to your teacher's, that's me, instructions. Clean your area that you're going to use the approved counter cleaner. You're going to grab paper towels or rags, and you're going to wash that down, whether that's the counters or it's your desk, either or, sometimes both. You are also going to be responsible for disinfecting microscopes with the alcohol swabs, just to keep those clean, sanitary, and ready to be used by anybody. And again, we come back to the wash your hands with soap and water. And you're going to notice that there are soap dispensers and paper towel dispensers at all of the sinks along each side of the classroom, as well as the main sink in the back of the classroom. And those are all available to you with that understanding that washing your hands and washing the equipment is your responsibility. So, after the lab, clean up your area as directed, wash your hands. So now we get to the report any accidents. Things that you need to report immediately to your teacher. If you spill anything, a lot of times, since you're working in groups, one person can grab the towels and start to clean up the spill while somebody else goes and gets the teacher so that the teacher can be part of the cleanup process, because depending on what is spilled, there might be different ways that it needs to be handled. Anytime you break something, a ruler, a test tube, etc., you need to go and get the teacher. So again, lab mates keep people away from where the item has been broken. One person from the lab group then comes and gets the teacher. With broken glass, the expectation is that you as the student will never clean that up, that will be the teacher's job. Finally, you need to make sure that you go ahead and report any and all injuries, even if you consider them to be minor. There are just things going on that you don't necessarily know that the teacher needs to be aware of. So again, let's look at this in more depth, and it's really not. Report spills and report accidents, no matter how minor, okay? So, don't eat or drink. It seems like a fairly self-explanatory rule that wouldn't necessarily need to take up space in order to be its own rule. However, it comes up every year. So, in biology, we use a lot of things in labs that are sugars and juices and things that you might eat outside of the science classroom. However, once they're in the lab, these things are not meant to be eaten because they are not taken care of in a way that would keep them safe for eating. And we're doing experiments on them, meaning we're adding things and taking things away. And so we don't eat or drink in the lab. We also don't use glassware as a cup to drink out of or eat out of. So no eating, no drinking. So never drink from the laboratory glassware. And this extends beyond to never mix, touch, taste, heat, or inhale chemicals until you are told to do so. And so we're really not interacting with anything, even if you're like, well, this is a cup of sugar. I can eat some of this. I eat it all the time. That could be true, but again, it's not in the same circumstance that we are having in the lab. So the main rule that you need to be very aware of is just we don't eat or drink anything in the lab, and that extends out to the mixing, touching, tasting, heating, inhaling. The interactions need to be as described or instructed by your teacher. So as we go through this, we're getting around to emergency procedures. Now, emergency procedures, this is kind of a catch-all for a lot of different things that are going to be happening. And notice you have a little bit of extra space here in this particular aspect of your notes. And so the expectation is you might have to write a few more things down than you normally would in the other ones themselves. But you first need to know where all the safety equipment is located and how to use it. You need to know who to call in case of emergencies for help, and you need to know emergency procedures for the building. So outside of the safety lab stuff itself within the classroom, you need to know the building safety level things as well. So let's start looking at this. One of the few pieces of safety equipment that I use pretty much every year in my classroom is the emergency eye wash. Things get in people's eyes. And so it's really important that we go through exactly what you need to do. So if you get eye contact, that means with a chemical or you have like a projectile or something stuck in your eye, you're going to go to the eye wash station, which is at the back of the classroom, and you're going to flush your eyes with running water for at least 15 minutes. Now, this seems like an easy task, but it's actually quite hard because your eyes want to naturally close to keep the water and things out of there. You have to actually hold your eyes open and then move your eye around as much as possible to get water on all surfaces of the eyeball, as well as in the surrounding folds and tissues, to make sure that anything that's in there comes out. If you get something in your eye and you're wearing contacts, you need to take that contact out immediately if you can. We also have to talk about fire extinguishers. For the most part, it is never the expectation that a student is going to have to use the fire extinguisher for the classroom. The teacher will be the one that discharges the extinguisher. But in case something else happens and there's a situation where you need to use the fire extinguisher, you need to know where they are located at the front and the back of the room, and then realize that you pull the safety pin and you squeeze the handle to discharge the extinguisher. The best thing that you need to do is remember the acronym PASS. And what that stands for is to pull the pin, aim at the fire, squeeze the trigger, and sweep at the base of the fire in order to put it out. We will go through and walk through each of the procedures for the fire emergency, tornado emergency, what's a shelter in place, what's a lockdown. But an overview is going to happen right now. So in case of a fire emergency, we're going to go together as a group out the side doors, out onto the soccer field, the artificial turf, where we will group up and report in. If there's a tornado, we go to the interior of the building. And like I said, we will go through that more in depth and take a little field trip where we're going to go. Finally, we have the two separate situations here that sometimes get confused. We have shelter in place and lockdown. Shelter in place means everybody's in the classroom, the doors are locked, but business as usual continues on. So we will continue having class. We will continue working on whatever we are working on. That's different than a lockdown. In a lockdown, the halls are swept, you're in a classroom, the doors are locked, lights are off. We will move to our lockdown positions, which we will go through together in a moment, and you will be silent. No working, no on your phones, just silently sitting and waiting until we get the all clear. So if a lockdown is called for, you need to immediately go into that mode of silence, move to your position. We are not teaching. We're just calmly waiting for further instruction. That's different than a shelter in place. And so that emergency procedure distinction should be true in all classrooms. If you turn the page in your notebook to the next page, you are going to see that you have these safety symbols on this table. And what I need you to do is, as we go through this, you're going to go ahead and fill these out, because these safety symbols will be used at various times in different activities that we are going to do. So this first little safety symbol is a pair of goggles. And so what that means is that there's an eye hazard associated with this particular activity. And so the lab safety rule that goes with that is wear safety goggles. The next picture is of a laboratory apron or a lab apron, and that means to wear a lab apron to protect your skin and clothing. The skull and crossbones means that there's going to be some sort of chemical safety associated with whatever activity you are working on. And so you need to be sure that you do not touch the chemicals. You need to rinse immediately if the chemical comes into contact with your skin or your clothing. We aren't inhaling, and we're keeping our hands away from our face so that we don't accidentally contaminate ourselves with this particular chemical. Moving forward, we have this symbol of a Bunsen burner, which means that we're going to be having a fire hazard. And so the safety rules that go along with the fire hazard, you need to tie back your loose hair, remove or tie up loose clothing. And that's going to include things like big dangly earrings and necklaces, things like that. We need to be sure that we're not using the burner near flammable materials, things like books, papers, the underneath of cabinets, things like that. As you're heating test tubes too, it's always important to remember that as you're heating the test tube on a flame, you point it away from yourself, so toward a wall, away from yourself as well as away from others surrounding the area. Then we have this symbol here that looks like a flask and some bottles. And what that means is that there's a breakage hazard. And so we're going to handle these breakables with care, and we're going to remember to check for chipped and cracked glassware, because those pieces of glassware, if they're chipped or cracked, can act inappropriately and cause issues for us in regards to safely using that equipment. The plug-in is for electrical hazard, and so just be sure that you're doing the appropriate techniques with electrical equipment. So we're not using it around water, our hands and our equipment isn't wet, we're not letting electrical cords dangle off of our workstation. We unplug the electrical equipment when it's not in use. I think that this is also a good time to really reiterate and stress that it's also very important that you not pull out the plug from an electrical outlet by pulling on the cord. You grip the plug firmly and remove it from the wall outlet. Pulling on the cord does a lot of things, and this isn't true with your computers as well as any of the lab equipment that we have. When you pull on the cord, you cause undue stress on where the cord meets the plug as well as where the plug meets the outlet. And so you can actually cause an electrical emergency by acting in that manner. Finally, we have animal safety, and animal safety is exactly that. You need to be respectful of live animals, and you're going to treat them with care, not cause them undue stress or pain, all of those types of things. Put them back in their container where they belong, and then really wash your hands very, very well because they carry lots of bacteria and contaminants. And so you may not think about it too, but this also goes anytime we're working with microorganisms, molds, bacteria, things like that. You don't have to worry so much about the stress and pain for the microorganism, but you do really need to be sure that you carefully wash your hands. So all of this together comes down to what are safe responses to each of these common things that can happen in different activity situations. So this isn't really something for you to write down, but rather just something for you to know. So if you get burned, you want to run cold water over the burn immediately while your lab partner goes and gets the teacher. If somebody faints, We need to be sure that they get fresh air. So move things away from them, get them comfortable where their head is lower than the rest of their body, which generally means you're going to put their feet up on a chair or something like that. Make sure that you take off goggles or anything tight and constricting, and then check for breathing. As that occurs, another person in the class will go get the teacher, and then we'll look at what needs to happen beyond that. So if there is a fire emergency, we need to be sure that all gas gets turned off. We can unplug appliances. We're going to use that fire extinguisher then to smother the fire. So you're going to get your teacher's attention. Everybody in the class is going to move away from the fire so that it can be addressed. Eye injury, we're going to immediately head to the eye wash station where you're going to flush the eye with running water. Going to pull out those contact lenses, and then be sure, and this is super important, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else, we get something in our eye, we want to rub it. Rubbing your eye, if there's something in there, is one of the worst things that you can do, because you're going to exacerbate the damage or the issue itself. And so try not to touch your face, get to the eye wash station, somebody go and grab the teacher. Minor cuts, make sure that you wash it out with soap and water, apply pressure, get a Band-Aid as necessary. Now, poisoning should never happen, but you need to go and get the teacher immediately if one of your classmates consumes anything out of the laboratory. And then finally, spills on the skin. It's going to look real similar to a burn. You are going to wash or run water over that as much as possible. Get the teacher for anything else that needs to occur. And of course, if the spill is bad enough and covers enough of your body, we're going to have to use the safety shower. So like I said, there's a lot that goes on in that emergency procedures aspect of lab safety rules. And so you can see there's this nice, neat little 3 things that you need to know, when in essence, it's a lot of things that you need to know. So be sure that you are comfortable with each of those different aspects of the safety procedures and emergency procedures. Next, we're going to make sure that we are always working neatly. So that means to keep yourself and your workspace tidy and clean. What this allows us to do is to head off a lot of issues that could occur in the laboratory. So never work alone in the laboratory. In order to get things done, sometimes it's tempting to work by ourselves, but it's important that we don't work by ourselves. Having a partner or 2 in there with you is only going to help you be far more successful and safer overall. So when you first enter the lab, we're not touching any of the equipment or chemicals or other materials until your teacher has the opportunity to go through all of the safety procedures with you and make sure that you know exactly what the procedures of the activity are. Only the books, notebooks, pens, etc. needed for the lab should be in the lab space. All other things, purses, backpacks, computers, jackets, sweatshirts, all those things should not be brought to class. If they're in class, they need to be left in the designated area, completely out of the way. Your extra materials are a tripping hazard to not only you, but to your classmates and your teacher as well. Working neatly also includes wearing the appropriate footwear. Try and avoid wearing loose clothing, at least be able to remove it or tie it up. Dangling jewelry, tie up your hair, work neatly and cleanly in order to have a safe experience in the laboratory. So that brings us to the be careful, no horseplay. So even though it's put as one rule, it really has 2 different aspects to it that are important. So first of all, be careful. Being careful is going to be, did you check your lab equipment and make sure that nothing is chipped, cracked, or broken? Did you get the electrical cords put away appropriately, put up out of the way, off of the workbench so that they aren't an electrical hazard or a tripping hazard to anybody, and only using them when it's appropriate to be so. Be sure that all your gas jets and electrical connections and water faucets are turned off at the end of the lab period, and that they're really only turned on when they are being actively used in order to avoid those mishaps and accidents. Avoid contamination. So we don't put unused chemicals, even if those chemicals are sugar, back into the original containers. They need to be disposed of properly, and your teacher will always go through that with you at the beginning of every lab experience. And then finally, I don't know how many times I can keep stressing this and putting it into this presentation, but you need to be sure that you wash your hands with soap and water before you leave the lab. Horseplay is just a generic term, but we know what it looks like. No goofing off, right? So no rough play, no running and throwing, and none of that is going to be tolerated. No flicking water or causing chaos. You need to conduct yourself in a responsible manner at all times, because you're not only protecting yourself and your safety, but you are protecting all of your classmates and their safety as well by doing things in that responsible manner. Horseplay, practical jokes, pranks, they're dangerous, they're prohibited, and you will have the biggest punishment possible if you are caught doing those things. So finally, we're going to end with our final rule, which is to listen to and read all directions from the instructor. And so I will always try to give things to you two ways. I will go through it verbally and highlight the key points, but it will always be written out for you as well. The expectation is you listen to the presentation and you read the directions and the step-by-step portions of that. So what we have. So finally, after you have those as a verbal, auditory experience as well as reading, you need to make sure that you follow all of those directions. They are given to you for the specific reason that they're being pointed out to you so that you can be safe and your classmates can be safe as well. So we're going to read each experiment before beginning. You're going to note any precautions or hazards that are described in that. You're never going to perform unauthorized experiments because directions need to be followed exactly as stated in the lab handouts and or by the teacher. And then you need to make sure that you understand the procedure before beginning the lab. So if you have questions, ask the teacher. It's really important that you know what the directions are and how to perform each of those different aspects to the activity. So all of that together, if you do all of these things every time that there is a lab activity, this will ensure that you will have a safe and productive lab experience where you can learn the most from your labs. And so what we're going to end with today is a video on general lab safety with the Amoeba Sisters, where they're going to go through just a few more things a little bit more in depth. And that's going to be our safety discussion.